C.S. Davidson in Hanover, and since then we now have offices in Lancaster, York, and Gettysburg.
Greg Scott came to us today from Pittsburgh area. Greg has a fairly impressive resume, and I'll try to read down through a couple things to let you know a little bit about his background and what he comes today to talk to us about, and how his background allows us to speak fairly intelligently about these issues. He most recently served 2 terms as the governor of the Society of Engineers, which is ASCE. That governorship covered Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia as the governor of the ASCE. He served as the chairman for ASCE's annual conference in Montreal. He has served on the committee for annual specialty conferences, but most importantly, when I look over his resume, he talks about the fact that he served on the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Report Card Committee in 2006, and then he followed that up as the chairman of that committee in 2010 to create a report card for the infrastructure in Pennsylvania. So I think he's fairly well vested to be able to talk about this subject today. He currently serves as the vice chair for the Construction Legislative Council, and I think I'm happy to welcome him here to talk to you a little bit about the state of our infrastructure, both in the state and the region. So.
Thank you everybody for giving me a chance to talk about this. This is something that I'm particularly passionate about, and I think it's important that the engineering community particularly is more active in getting the word out about the state of infrastructure and working with elected officials as well as the public about the awareness of infrastructure. As was mentioned in my bio, that I served as Region 2 governor and chaired the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Committee development of the report cards. These are those. We have copies in the back. If you're interested in picking them up, feel free. And just for your information, in 2014 we'll have a new one. So this is an ongoing process. There we go. I don't think this group needs a lot of convincing to understand why infrastructure is important, but one of the things that ASCE has done has been developing studies and particularly a lot of visual aids with the concept of getting out the word of the importance of infrastructure to the general public. So most of these slides you see are actually available on ASCE's website. So if you are interested in ever talking to Rotary or Boy Scouts, etc., feel free to grab these. These are free, and a lot of this information is designed to really reach out to the general public and not necessarily talk to folks that might be responsible for maintaining infrastructure. What's most important that I like to point out about this slide is the number on the bottom. What the study that ASCE has performed was indicated that the current rate of funding, or I should say the current deficiency in funding, what's been determined is that it will cost an average American family $28,000 in income. Now, not necessarily money out of the pocket, but also increased costs that they would have to spend to travel, for gas, the materials they purchase, as well as lack of earning power, because obviously businesses have to invest more money in infrastructure, so they don't have as much money for raises, etc. So this economic projection is pretty astounding. $28,000 of income tied up into a loss. And that's the theme I'm going to keep talking about in my presentation, not to let the cat out of the bag, but this discussion of infrastructure is not about do we spend or don't spend. It's if we spend and repair it, it costs X. If we do not spend, it costs us Y. And it's that lost income or the cost of doing business as usual that the American public doesn't understand, doesn't recognize necessarily. And so it's very easy to see that when you raise user fees, gas taxes, water rates, they see increases. They don't necessarily understand that a road that isn't repaired, their lettuce price goes up because the shipping of that lettuce takes longer, the trucking company charges more, and hence the prices go up. So because it's so diffused, it's not recognized. So as part of the whole process that ASCE's been doing since 2000, 1998 was the first report card they did nationally. They started doing them. They've settled into a 4-year cycle now. You see 2001, 2 years later 2003. In 2005, they finally locked into a 4-year cycle. And this was just released in March of this year. This gets a lot of press nationally. Typically, members of Congress are waving this around when it's released. And the numbers are astounding. $3.6 trillion of investment needs. Now some of that is being funded currently. That's the total investment required. The shortfall that we currently have in infrastructure is $1.1 trillion between what we need to spend to maintain it and what we're currently spending. So I once went to see a congressman and they showed him the report card and he goes, oh, 3.6 trillion, that's all you need. We'll write you a check. So there's a lot of information behind these grades, and they are all available, once again, on the website. They have detailed reports on every one of these categories. ASCE has now gone up to a total of 16 categories. I won't talk about all of them today because some of them obviously are more on a federal level, and a lot of them have impacts that aren't necessarily tied into the municipal side. Aviation, for example. I don't think anybody here own an airport. Those issues are obviously more of a broader policy. We're really going to focus on roads and bridges, transit, water and wastewater. The one item that national has not done that we've done in Pennsylvania is stormwater, and we're trying to get national to add that to the next report card 4 years hence. One of the things ASCE did in advance of the release of the report card is what they call their failure to act study. And they went to determine what would be the cost of not doing anything. And then when I mentioned about those impacts, the $28,000, that's where that all came from. Those were released last year in advance of the report card that was released in March. And I said the gap in funding is $1.1 trillion. And what they're trying to indicate in these studies, and I'll show further drill downs, this is more the general overview of the entire study. They broke the study into transportation, into water, into ports and inland waterways, into aviation. So they broke the report down over several months as they released these sections with an in-depth study. These things are they're voluminous, the studies, so there's a lot of good information about particular impacts. This number, of course, is reflecting on a federal level. One of the things that ASCE's encouraged and we in Pennsylvania started doing was, when you hear this federal discussion, the question naturally is, well, what's that mean to me? What's it mean to Pennsylvania? So in 2006, we did our first report card on Pennsylvania's infrastructure. And we didn't think about it at the time, but I heard about it afterwards, that our little logo there kind of looks like a tombstone. And yeah, we had a lot of bad news, and that was the comment everyone was making. Like, what are you telling us? And we did a total of 9 grades in 2006. Aviation, bridge, dam, navigable waterways, drinking water, rail, roads, transit, and wastewater. Then, and as follow-up, in 2010, we released our new report card and actually had 12 categories. You may notice the one that did not carry over was aviation. We intended to, the volunteers that were working on it didn't get it done. We couldn't wait. We have a schedule on this. We typically release it in May. In 2006, that was, and so happens, our release cycle now falls in line with the governor's race. And that year, we had no incumbent, so that wasn't the problem. In 2010, we did have Governor Rendell was up for re-election, and it was picked up by the Swan campaign, and I guess if you say any news is good news. But we did get some feedback from the governor's race about this, and we've thought about that and discussed it. Is it a good thing to have to make it political? And we decided yes. We want to keep it in the awareness and have the questions be answered about what the various administrations are doing. But we were very careful about not trying to criticize the agencies. The reports that the grades we develop, the numbers, all the data behind it, are all gleaned from existing reports. A lot of the transportation section comes from PennDOT documents, EPA needs assessments and DEP information, or then there's allied organizations like TRIP that develop information on quality of road rides, et cetera. That is what we use to develop this. ASCE does not actually conduct surveys of roads and bridges to develop this report card. So we're simply pulling together all this information. It's all documented on the website where we got the data. Encourage people obviously to read the data behind it. But the thought was we wanted to make this very simple so that if your children brought home a report card like this, you would not be very pleased. That's kind of the message we're trying to send to the public, is really understandable, digestible about how we're performing. A little bit about the grades, the pluses and minuses. They reflect trends in funding. Some of you folks who have knowledge of bridges may question the C. And in 2006, when we developed the bridge grade, we were only looking at structurally deficient. I believe Pennsylvania had 27% of its bridges were structurally deficient in 2006. And we thought, well, that means a 73 in schools a C. That's why we gave them the grade. Subsequently, the evaluation of bridges has been expanded to mean structurally deficient and functionally obsolete, which in Pennsylvania this year, that's about 44% meet that criteria. So Pennsylvania's grade on bridges is actually pretty bad. We had given the grade of C in 2006. PennDOT launched the Accelerated Bridge Program. I think it was in 2009. And so in 2010, we said we don't want to tell the public that PennDOT did all this work and dropped their grade. So we kept it a C. The national group had some issues with us about it. And after the report card came out, the Secretary of Transportation talked about it, and he said that ASCE is being very generous, that grade is too high. It should have been a D. So I think the agencies do understand what we're doing. We've worked very carefully and worked with them in advance of the report card. We meet with them before it's released so they understand what it is that we're trying to do, and it's really to tell the public that a lot of the funding is not adequate to support the needs of infrastructure. So and there you can see the comparison between 2006 and 2010, and obviously a lot of this doesn't move quickly. These trends, they take a while to implement these programs. So I had an elected official talk to me, I think it was in 2007, after the report came out in 2006, and he said, well, I'm gonna see the new report card and see what grades have changed. A, we don't do it every year, and B, they need to do something and then put the money in, come up with the funding, create the programs, and then allow it to work its way through the system to really start seeing changes. A comparison briefly between national and Pennsylvania, some of these grades. Bridges, the national grade is a C+, and you will see that 1 out of every 9 bridges in the country are rated structurally deficient, and the average age is 42 years. But in Pennsylvania, as I said, the total number of bridges that are functionally obsolete or structurally deficient is 44%. We are, unfortunately, the leaders in the nation as far as that category. Pennsylvania is the worst. Now, Pennsylvania does have the largest number of bridges in the country, so understandably, we do have a lot of challenges. Geographically, where we're located, it becomes an issue. We got a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, and we're also the east-west corridor, being the Keystone State. So we get a lot of wear and tear from heavy traffic, but it's a burden that we have. That's our location, that's our geology, that's our topography, and that's our challenges to achieve. Fortunately, we do get some money from the federal government, but obviously it's insufficient, and we need to come up with a plan of how we're going to address the rest. I'll talk about some future funding proposals a little bit. For roads, the national grade is a D, and the interesting fact here is that the cost to the average motorist for poor road quality is $324 per motorist. That is a number that I think often people do not understand or do not associate with as they sit in traffic whereas they have to repair their tires or fix their struts. If that road surface was smoother, they wouldn't have those costs. If the road was wider or had better traffic controls, they wouldn't have a congestion, they wouldn't spend as much in gas. So that information of relating road quality to cost is very important. In Pennsylvania, we have a grade of D as well, with 38% of our roads listed as poor or mediocre condition, but the cost per motorist is higher than the national average. We're at $341 per motorist. So as you've heard the discussions about various funding options for roads, raising the gas tax, raising various fees, and they talk about the cost per motorist of $100 a year, this is the option you're comparing it to. Do nothing, spend $341, or spend $100 and have that number go down. Now that's the challenge I guess we all face, is additional funding comes in, we need to make sure that it's wisely spent and it has an impact. We need to make sure we tell the public about what is being done with their money so that the road quality improves and hence their cost of repairs go down. Obviously, if we increase fees and spend money and that number stays the same, there'll be a lot of answering to do to a lot of people. But that is the argument to make about spending, is that the cost to repair it is actually better than the cost that the public is spending and not repairing it. In transit, the national grade is a D, and in Pennsylvania, it likewise is a D. The reason I put transit in here, I was just actually in Harrisburg on Tuesday, and of course for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, transit means a lot. In central PA and the northern tier, a lot of the public doesn't understand that every county has a transit system and that every county does benefit from it. But when I talk to certain elected officials from the northern tier about transit, one of my comments was, do away with SEPTA, do away with the Port Authority. Just all those 450,000 people, which majority are in those two areas, will need to be on the road, and you'll need to expand the road capacity in these dense urban cores. And building a highway in downtown Philadelphia is much more expensive than building a highway in Potter County. So actually, it's a wise investment to invest in transit in dense urban areas. And we've approached this as a system. And so the funding needs to be comprehensive. We need to address roads and bridges and transit, because doing one or the other, we're fighting over a slice of pie. We just need a bigger pie, and where it makes sense to put people on buses or light rail, that's a wise investment. Every time I drive to work and I pass a bus, I am so happy because there's 40 people on that bus not sitting in traffic in front of me. And then of course the benefits to some of the other counties in Pennsylvania, such as York and Lancaster, having the paratransit and the transit systems that assist the elderly. That's another system that benefits a particular at-needs risk population in Pennsylvania. That I think it's important that a lot of people don't recognize that transit funding is helping those folks in part of your constituency. The failure to act study, as I mentioned, they did a breakout on the surface transportation infrastructure, and they were talking about the impact on funding for roads and what the additional investment is and how much money it saves. I really hit that hard earlier about the cost and the impact. And I think here's the interesting number was, with the construction, if we fund infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, not only is it about jobs, obviously putting contractors to work, keeping engineers busy, but also adding GDP, because obviously moving goods and services is what's most important to the businesses. The TFAC report that came out, that Governor Corbett had done, talked about the funding need in Pennsylvania, that the current funding gap is $3.5 billion. And the discussions, obviously, that are, if you're following what's happening, Senate Bill number 1, that was just Senator Rafferty put forth, and I believe it's going to appropriations. I think on Tuesday they moved it to them. is for $2.5 billion of funding. So obviously, the 3.5 funding shortfall is not going to be met wholly by the state, nor should it be. There is a certain responsibility that the federal government needs to step up. Obviously, the MAP 21, the federal transportation legislation they passed, didn't really solve the problem, and in a few years they'll be hopefully coming out with a new federal transportation bill, and what we're going to advocate for is that makes up that additional $1 billion of shortfall. But in the meantime, the state has to step forward with some additional funding. The governor's proposal he discussed was $1.8 billion. What we're hearing is we're hopeful that the solution will be somewhere between there. Me personally, I hope it's on the high side. But it looks good that there will be some more additional funding coming into the municipalities to address some of the shortfalls in transportation. The last gas tax increase was in 1997. Every time I would go to Harrisburg, I would see now former Senator Stout. And Senator Stout never failed to mention to me that in 1997 we passed the gas tax increase and you engineers never said anything. And I pledged him every time I would see him, because he brought it up every time, was that, Senator, you passed the gas tax increase, and we will make sure that we shout from the rooftops about, what a wise investment that is. Let the public know that the elected officials are not being wasteful; they're actually investing in the infrastructure, and it's going to have a beneficial return. When we did a survey with the public about what message resonates with them, they don't understand functionally obsolete bridges. They don't care about the number of structurally deficient bridges. What they care about is congestion and safety. Those are the issues that is most important to the public, that we have to make sure those are the issues that we address, and those are the issues that they understand are being addressed with additional funding. So, as I say, this is what we'll see. Allow people to be safe. Kids can go to school safely. A little quick story I've heard from now former Representative Geist. There's a community up in, I think that's in Cambria County, or Clarion, Cambria, I believe. They have a bridge, and the school bus gets to the bridge. The kids get off the school bus. The kids walk across the bridge. The school bus drives across the bridge. The kids get back on the bus because they're afraid of driving the loaded bus over the bridge. And so it's those messages that you can get out to the public about the needs really starts resounding with them about the need to address the infrastructure and what their money funds. So what I would encourage the elected officials and the managers to do, obviously, is to, as you're looking at your program, when you identify which projects are bad, when you make those repairs, be sure to let the public know what it was that was done. It's their money. I think it's important that we share that with them, and we hope they'll be a little more receptive because you're addressing those two core issues: congestion and safety. If you come back and say, "Well, we had a rating program and this road ride was a little rough and now it's a little smooth," that doesn't really resound with them. So when you're out there talking to the public, be sure to let them know what you're doing with their money. I wanted to mention about inland waterways, and I was asked, why inland waterways when we're here in Lancaster? What does folks in Central PA care about this? And I talked to Senator Rafferty last year, and one of his big projects is the Naval Yard in Philadelphia, and they're really looking to dredge the Delaware River. And with the Panama Canal expanding in 2014, what they're looking for is to bring more shipping up to Philadelphia, and obviously using a lot of container ships. They'll put those containers in the intermodal, either in the rail or on the trucks. They'll bring them out to Central PA, and from there they'll radiate north and south and continue west. So Central Pennsylvania really benefits from the investment in the inland waterways, particularly in Philadelphia, with the dredging of the Delaware River. Over in Pittsburgh, we have the river system with the locks and dams. As you can see, the age of locks and dams are nearly 60 on average. We have some out there that are over 80 years old. The Elizabeth Dam in particular was recently inspected, and they found it was nearly undermined, and they had to make emergency repairs. Those systems are really antiquated. They cost a lot to break the barges apart to bring it up. And obviously, trucking bulk goods like sand and coal on barges is much more efficient for the haulers than using trucks. Additionally, all that material, if it was put onto the roads and trucks, it would just further accelerate the road damage. So there's a benefit to bringing up that material, and a lot of the barge haulers with those bulk goods use Pittsburgh to access the Northeast. So once again, they bring supplies up the Mississippi River, up the Ohio, and then they can come into Central PA, up to New York, Boston. So there's a reversed logistical system that really a lot of people aren't really aware of, but the Port of Pittsburgh brings in a lot of those bulk materials. So when we talk to elected officials, this obviously is not a local issue, nor is this really a state issue. This is really a federal issue. But we want to make sure that everybody's aware of the needs and the benefits of the inland waterway system, so that when there's discussions with your Pennsylvania's federal legislators, that we have a unified front, that Pennsylvania really wants a bill passed and federal funding supported. The good news was, I believe it was late last week, that the Water Resource Recovery Act, I think it was, they had a companion bill called the Rivers Bill. It was to fund the locks and dams. So a bill was just passed. I have to read it to understand what its impact and what they're going to fund, but it looks like they're going to increase funding to the Corps to address some of these deficiencies in some of the lock and dam system. I still don't know about the dredging of the Delaware. I know there was an issue with, I think New Jersey was challenging Pennsylvania with the ability to dredge the river. I'm not sure. I've heard discussions that it's their concern that Philadelphia would compete against New York. So if they hold up the Philadelphia job, New York will get more traffic when the canal is open. So there's a lot of that going on, but we'll continue to follow it. But if you ever get a chance to advocate for inland waterways, we ask that you do. Drinking water is drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater is the last ones I'll go over briefly. The national grades of a D, and they're estimating 7 billion gallons of clean water is lost daily, by leaking pipes nationwide. In Pennsylvania, we have a grade of a D+, and it's estimated that $15.5 billion is needed over the next 20 years to address the aging water lines and water treatment plants and to comply with the regulations. On the wastewater side, the national grade is a D-, and of course it discharges billions of gallons of untreated wastewater. In Pennsylvania, the grade is also a D-, and it's estimated that the expenditures required is $20 billion in the next 20 years. For stormwater, as I said, there is no national grade, but in Pennsylvania we gave it a grade of D-. What's interesting, when you look at this number, that 84% of the Pennsylvanians rely on surface water as their water source, there's no dollar figure here because we don't know. There really is no method to calculate at this point what the needs are for stormwater. So it was under Governor Rendell. They did the sustainable infrastructure report with the idea of sustainability being financially, and that's where the $15 billion and $20 billion were developed. They're looking at water and wastewater. I've always thought that water resource is really a three-legged stool. You have the sewers, you have the water lines, but you have the storm sewers as well. And it's a failure to date that we've not really addressing the stormwater impact. Now, the MS4 program has started. Obviously, I feel it's far behind where we're at with the regulations for the drinking water and wastewater. A lot of people may feel it's a burden, but if you really look at it, once again, holistically from a system, from a watershed or sewer shed, if we don't look at storm sewers, then we have a major point source discharge that is currently not being addressed. And the TMDL program obviously is going to be a little bit behind, but it's also moving forward as far as addressing the concept of water quality from a watershed standpoint. So those things are beneficial. Some of the things we're advocating is that they also go forth and start identifying what is the cost of the storm sewer systems. I don't know how you address problems if you can't put numbers to it, can't identify them. So that's some of the things we advocate when we go to Harrisburg. As far as the funding, this little chart is the federal level about the safe water, or the state revolving loan fund, of course, which funds Pinvest. The little blip you see there in 2009, that was the stimulus program, the ARRA. But as you can see, it's really flatlined, that the federal government has really not made this a priority to give additional monies to the states to fund water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. In the study that was done that I mentioned before, the Sustainable Infrastructure Report, what this chart is showing is the funding gap, and on the bottom, across the bottom, is the rates set as a percentage of mean household income. And what they looked at is if the rates increase, obviously the funding gap closes. And for those of you who might work with Pinvest, you'll recognize that that's kind of the formula they use. They look at the rates as far as the mean household income and decide whether you're eligible for grants or grant loan combination. And in wastewater, it's the same, that you see that the needs close if the rates go up a little bit. And we've struggled with that issue. So what this is saying is you need to raise rates. Of course, that's not a good message to tell ratepayers. They don't hear that. So in vein of the discussion from Chris about asset management, if you really start looking at your water and sewer systems and even storm sewer systems as an asset, start managing it that way, and start looking at the full cost price of operations and start looking at replacement cost, that's when you'll start recognizing that a lot of these future costs, you need to start collecting $1 today and put that aside, and then in 10 years you'll have a much larger pot of money to make capital improvements, not borrow, and over time that actually starts paying off because you're no longer incurring the borrowing cost. So they're struggling with this report was well received, and it was pretty comprehensive. I think they surveyed over 300 systems across the state, but from it had a bunch of recommendations and nothing's really moved forward. So transportation seems to be the main focus now, but we're definitely looking at next year making this one of the priorities, to really sit down with the PMAA and the borough and township associations and the regulators and the legislators and talk about what we can do to change this formula, that we can start accumulating monies so we can start addressing some of the shortfalls without incurring a lot of cost. Because certainly we can't go to the state and ask for $20 billion for wastewater and $15 billion for drinking water. The money's just not there. So we need to be a little bit creative on mechanisms. An example that I'm personally familiar with is what West Virginia is doing. They implemented a program last year that if you get their version of Pinvest, you have to implement asset management. And they use an EPA shareware, which is free, or you can use proprietary software if you have it. But you start managing your infrastructure, you start looking at replacement costs, you can start looking at your most critical infrastructure and make some decisions on if I'm going to spend my money, I spend it here versus here. They've mandated that on a state level. Obviously, if you're not getting funded from the state, you don't have to do it, but they're hoping in time that'll start capturing a lot of their systems. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so we're a little biased against West Virginia. I'm a little shocked about the progressiveness, and so we're a little upset that Pennsylvania's behind. So we do want to talk to the owners of the systems about that, see if how receptive folks would be to that. Just as a show of hands, who has an asset management program for their municipality? So one. That's one of the questions we've wondered, how many people already have it. Hate to put burdens on people if they're already doing it. West Virginia is accepting if you had one, just plug it in. If you didn't have one, they'll work with you to get one. On the failure to act study for water and wastewater, as I said, the cost for the water infrastructure, most notably is the impact on business. That it's almost threefold. That obviously the deficiencies in water and the additional cost and unreliability has a major impact on the cost of business. And so in this economic climate, we want to make sure that we are addressing the infrastructure necessary for business to be successful. So it's very important that we continue to pursue the water, wastewater, and stormwater funding. As I mentioned before, the report card sites are available, www.pareportcard.org. We keep it up all the time. All the information about the grade reports are available. We encourage people to look at it, use it, cite it. I was just out in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, and their Chamber of Commerce, their executive director, cited the report card. So that's really the main focus of it was to make a tool that various elected officials can use. So we strongly encourage you all as municipal leaders to take advantage of it. And the question is about what we do next. We have been active with trying to write a series of letters to the editor, op-eds. We have a ASCE Pennsylvania Facebook page. And of course, we're going to be updating the report card next year. One of the things we did on the Facebook page was develop some humorous, we call them postcards because they're actually designed to be postcard size. And we hope they go viral because a little bit tongue-in-cheek about the condition of Pennsylvania's infrastructure. And we want the public to start looking at this and saying, yeah, that's ridiculous, and this really needs to get fixed. And start asking the elected officials to address the problems, and what are you doing to fix them, versus complaining about the cost of everything. And that one's my personal favorite. And then we have the thrill of the open road with all the traffic. And this is a picture of Pittsburgh, I think about 3 weeks ago. That's what one of the things we were trying to get across there was, if we don't fix the roads, we're going to be going back to gravel and dirt roads in some areas. And lastly, this was a transit-oriented one, trying to indicate the importance of transit to the downtown core. Now, we were very successful with using this one. The Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce has come out and endorsed transit funding, and so has UPMC and Highmark, and some of the hospitals in Pittsburgh. Majority of their employees use transit. So, yeah, in Pittsburgh, the discussion of transit has really gone beyond a discussion of suburban and urban. It's really now become a discussion for business, and a lot of the business folks and business leaders who might live in Fox Chapel in a nice suburban area understand now that transit's important to them. ASC Priorities right now, transportation is definitely our number one, and I'm hoping that gets addressed this year, and we can maybe put environmental infrastructure up there next. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
You had a couple of bar charts when you were talking about the water and wastewater fees. Could you explain what you were trying to show?
Sure. What they're showing is that the column is the needs. The current needs for drinking water is $15 billion is the needs. And the color breakdown is by size of system. Small, medium, large. And as you increase rates, hence you generate more revenue, you can address it. So you shrink the shortfall. So the question that they asked when they did this study was, if rates go up 0.5%, what's the need? Well, it's about 14 billion. But if it goes up to 2 or 2.5, the gap goes away. You suddenly start generating the revenue necessary to fix your infrastructure. So the takeaway is systems need to start looking at the full cost. If you're currently charging a rate based on the current operational cost, but not looking at your future needs, you're undercharging for the water. If you start doing asset management and start looking at your future needs and start collecting a few bucks for it now, you can accumulate that money and then you can address it without borrowing. And so that's the takeaway from that chart. They've struggled with how to implement this. I strongly against the state stepping in and mandating that everyone charges 5.5% of the median household income. We don't want that. Systems need to be able to look and set their own rates. Another reference to West Virginia. West Virginia, they have water districts, but their water districts are administered by a public service commission, which is like a PUC for authorities. And they decide what rates are allowed to be set. So their systems are not allowed to raise the rates to generate revenues to address shortfalls. So that's part of the reason they're doing the asset management, is their version of DEP is fighting against the Public Service Commission to show that we need to raise rates to address capital needs. These systems need to be accumulating capital funds, emergency funds, because when you have a water line break and you have no money, you have to borrow it. And the net long-term cost of that is greater than if you wisely manage your asset and accumulate money, put it aside. If you're looking at a 20-year time span, that's the much better way to run a system versus just waiting for the next catastrophe. So that is the big challenge, is because obviously a lot of the consumers want low rates, and you have to really, once again, give them the message of the rate increase is going to address deficiency, it's address reliability of service. It comes back to that again about the communication between the utility owner and the public about what you're doing with their money. And in Pittsburgh, obviously, if you followed along, everyone's talking about the regional sewer problem out there. The numbers being bandied about are $2 billion to $3.5 billion. The rates are going up, but so far the public has seen a lot of activity. Sewers have been cleaned and inspected and repaired that have never been touched in 80 years. So far, the various rate increases have been met with, I won't say they're resigned, but people actually are seeing something for their money. They're a little concerned about the long term, $3.5 billion. Some of these rates are going to go up to, people will be spending $1,000 a year in sewer bills, and they're currently spending about $240. So there is a lot of concern from the capital side, but Alcan particularly has done a very good job of having a communication with their ratepayers. As part of that whole program, they launched an open house. My wife laughs at me that every September I go down to the sewage plant, I help them give tours, and I have lunch. They have really good cheeseburgers at the water plant, at the sewer plant. But they really have done a good job of educating. They have fish tanks, kids come in, they learn about, become environmental stewards. And really are aware that there's significant investment in that infrastructure and keeping it behind a locked gate, even after 9/11. I mean, they're still doing this. I think hats off to them for doing it, because I think it's very important that the public does understand that infrastructure and what it is and how significant of cost that them and previous generations have invested in this infrastructure. The other thing they've done is they've done outreach programs. They have summer camps for kids. So I think that awareness has really helped them as they've raised their rates. The public have come to the sewer plant and see these massive facilities and understand what the investment is. And like I said, so far so good for them that they've not got a lot of backlash. Any other questions? Yes.
I think it should be pointed out, you talked about the governor's task force on sustainable infrastructure. I think it was at least 3 of the C.S. Davidson people in here served on various committees of that. And you were right about the asset management component of that. There was a proposal on the table for the utilities to require the PUC to monitor the rates of all water and sewer providers to require asset management principles. I think we'll put our next speaker on the hot seat and asking if PennDOT's considering that for roads, because they've got the liquid fuels program. But that, I don't know if that ever survived into the final, but that's, asset management is the up-and-coming requirement.
Yeah, that report did include asset management, and I was up at a PMA conference in State College that they discussed that. And I expected that the smaller systems would have a lot of backlash about asset management and about the PUC regulating it. And I was surprised, and it was a heated conversation, that the larger systems, particularly, we're already doing this. We don't need the PUC coming in regulating us to do this. And that's why I particularly like the West Virginia model, that their PUC's not regulating it. It's just a condition of funding. They do have the state asking questions. You can't just take a napkin and put some numbers on and say, here's an asset management plan. There's some bare minimum. They do want you to put together an inventory, and they want you to put together a critical list, and you have to put together replacement cost. but they're not digging into it and reviewing it and saying, we disagree with these numbers. So really, they want you to go through the process and sort of identifying. And a lot of those systems don't have a good understanding of their system. We saw that in Pittsburgh with the CSO compliance program. I mean, there was no mapping. And so those orders require these systems to clean and TV and map, and that's greatly benefited them. It's, in effect, that was an asset management program. They really start identifying and quantifying what's happening in your sewer systems. And so we're hopeful, that's what ASCE actually, we put a white paper together and we have it floated out to a few groups like the AWWA and the Water Environment Federation. I just talked to a utility contractor group about asset management, and it doesn't have to have ASCE's name on it. We don't really care. And we want to talk to the Boroughs and Township Association about how can we implement asset management without being a burden, and what, because we believe the principles are sound. We see so many systems already embrace it, and some of the best run systems I know, do this routinely. So we don't want to put more burdens on them, but we want to encourage people to do it and make the tools available to folks to do it. So yeah, I think that is definitely the coming trend in water and sewer systems. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Greg, first of all, thank you. I thought I was going to get through a day without the words MS4 coming up. I'm sure all of you feel that way too sometimes. Our next speaker.